America blinked, and suddenly the election of 2020 was back on stage, this time with sirens, sealed doors, and lawyers sprinting faster than the news cycle. Cameras zoomed in, social media combusted, and the nation leaned forward like it was the season finale. Nobody asked for, but everyone must watch. Is this justice doing push-ups in public, or politics wearing a badge and a smirk? Between ballot boxes, court orders, and a chorus of outrage, the real drama isn't what was taken. It's what trust might lose. Stay till the end, because this story isn't about paper. It's about power, memory, and a country arguing with its own reflection. At precisely the moment America thought it had finally moved on, the past kicked down the door and demanded airtime. Fulton County did not wake up as a footnote in election history. It woke up as the main character in a national fever dream. What unfolded was described, argued, and live-streamed as a dramatic federal operation, framed by flashing lights, official statements, and a media ecosystem starving for spectacle. Whether you call it a search, a seizure, or a political earthquake with paperwork, the effect was instant. The country froze, phones lit up, and everyone suddenly became an expert in election law. The image mattered as much as the action. Federal agents, court paperwork, sealed rooms, guarded entrances in American politics. Visuals travel faster than facts, and this one spread like gasoline. Supporters of accountability saw resolve. Critics smelled theater. Skeptics asked the only rational question left: why now? The operation, according to public claims and legal filings, centered on election materials tied to the most litigated vote in modern history. That alone was enough to turn a procedural move into a cultural shockwave. Context is everything. Fulton County has lived under a microscope since 2020, audited, challenged, investigated, defended, and dissected more times than most institutions survive. Courts ruled, certifications stood, and yet the narrative never died. It hibernated, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge louder, sharper, and better produced. When federal authority intersects with unresolved public suspicion, neutrality becomes impossible. Every box is symbolic. Every document is a prophecy, depending on who is talking. Legally, a search warrant is not a verdict. It is permission to look, not a conclusion about what will be found. That distinction, while fundamental, does not survive contact with a polarized audience. The law speaks in procedures, politics translates everything into intent. One side hears overdue scrutiny, the other hears intimidation dressed in legal language. Both sides watch the same footage and walk away with opposite realities, convinced the other is either blind or corrupt. The tension escalates because elections are sacred infrastructure. Touching ballots, machines, or records triggers alarms embedded deep in the American psyche. This is not tax law or zoning disputes. This is the mechanism that decides power. When federal force appears anywhere near it, even symbolically, trust becomes collateral damage. The questions multiply faster than answers. Who authorized it? What exactly was taken? What happens next? And the most dangerous question of all, what if nothing comes of it? This is how a nation freezes. Not because of what is proven, but because of what is implied. The operation did not need conclusions to succeed as a moment. It already achieved something more volatile. It reopened a wound that never healed, reminded everyone how fragile agreement has become, and turned a county building into a mirror reflecting America's deepest suspicion of itself. Stay with this story, because the real impact is not measured in documents. It is measured in belief. The moment law enters politics, clarity leaves through the emergency exit. What remains is a gray zone where procedures are mistaken for conclusions and paperwork is treated like prophecy. This is where the story now lives. A search warrant, no matter how dramatic the optics, is not a declaration of guilt. It is a judicial permission slip, signed quietly, often sealed, and issued on the narrow question of whether there is probable cause to look, not certainty to convict. That distinction matters in courtrooms and barely survives on television. Election law is painfully unsexy when stripped of outrage. Ballots are records. Records are evidence. Evidence has chains of custody, retention rules, audit requirements, and preservation timelines dictated by federal and state statutes. Violating those rules can be criminal or merely administrative, depending on intent, scope, and consequence. This is where nuance goes to die. Improper storage does not equal fraud. Missing documentation does not equal manipulation. And yet, in a hyper-polarized country, every procedural flaw is promoted to a conspiracy with legs. The legal battlefield here is not about relitigating an election result. Courts closed that door years ago. It is about process integrity. Did officials comply with federal record retention laws? Were election materials preserved exactly as required? Were any documents altered, mishandled, or inaccurately logged? These questions sound boring until you realize they sit at the foundation of democratic legitimacy. When process fails, confidence erodes, even if outcomes remain unchanged. Federal authority complicates everything. Elections are administered locally, guarded jealously by states under the Constitution. Federal oversight exists, but it walks a tightrope. Step too lightly and critics accuse weakness. Step too firmly and accusations of overreach explode. This tension is not accidental. It is designed into the system, ensuring that no single actor controls the mechanism of power. The downside is spectacle. Every federal move near ballots feels seismic, regardless of its legal modesty. Then comes the favorite American pastime, motive hunting. Why this jurisdiction? Why this timing? Why this language in the warrant? Legal filings become literary texts, dissected for hidden meaning. Silence is read as guilt. Statements are read as confession. The law, which moves slowly by design, is dragged into a media cycle that demands instant villains and heroes. Comedy writes itself when legal analysts become prophets and social media turns footnotes into verdicts. The most dangerous misunderstanding is assuming investigation equals validation. Investigations are fishing expeditions with strict rules, not victory laps. Most end quietly, producing corrective actions, internal reforms, or nothing at all. That outcome rarely trends. What trends is anticipation. Suspicion thrives in the absence of closure, and the legal process is allergic to speed. This gray zone is where trust is tested, not by what the law ultimately decides, but by whether the public can tolerate uncertainty without tearing itself apart. The system was built to doubt itself, to question procedures, to correct errors. The real question is whether a nation addicted to certainty can survive a process that refuses to deliver it on demand. The story changed tone the moment intelligence was dragged into the frame, not because of confirmed actions, but because of how power is perceived in modern America. Intelligence agencies do not need to speak to dominate a narrative. Their silence alone is loud enough. The mere suggestion of high-level awareness, coordination, or proximity turns a legal process into a psychological event. This is not about who is in the room. It is about what Americans believe happens when intelligence and elections appear in the same sentence. In the public imagination, intelligence agencies are not bureaucracies. They are myths with budgets. They symbolize omnipresence, strategy, and secrets layered behind closed doors. When their names circulate around an election-related investigation, the discussion instantly shifts from evidence to intent. Viewers stop asking what the law permits and start asking who is pulling strings. That shift is combustible. Optics replace facts, and implication becomes ammunition. There is a critical distinction the media rarely respects. Intelligence oversight is not operational control. Awareness is not direction. Monitoring is not manipulation. In reality, intelligence agencies routinely track domestic threats to infrastructure, including election systems, cyber risks, and foreign interference narratives. That is not extraordinary. What is extraordinary is how quickly that routine responsibility is repackaged as shadow governance. The optics do the work without a single document changing hands. Political camps weaponize this ambiguity with precision. Supporters frame intelligence visibility as seriousness, proof that the matter is too important for local handling. Critics frame the same visibility as intimidation, arguing that intelligence symbolism chills dissent and poisons neutrality. Both interpretations thrive because the agencies themselves rarely clarify. Silence protects operations, but it also fertilizes paranoia. In a fractured media environment, the loudest interpretation wins the hour. The timing magnifies everything. When intelligence narratives surface during already volatile election debates, they are interpreted through suspicion, not context. Americans have been trained by decades of scandal, secrecy, and hindsight to assume that what is unseen is decisive. Every camera angle becomes forensic. Every absence becomes suspicious. Even distance is treated as involvement. This is how optics mutate into belief. Humor slips in because the absurdity is undeniable. Analysts dissect body language from press briefings that say nothing. Commentators map invisible chains of command like conspiracy cartographers. The intelligence community becomes both omnipotent and incompetent depending on the argument of the day. It is blamed for outcomes it cannot control and credited for influence it never exercised. Reality barely gets a seat. The danger is not intelligence participation. The danger is public perception of intelligence dominance over civilian processes. Democratic systems rely on the belief that ballots are counted by clerks, reviewed by courts, and corrected through law, not managed by unseen strategists. Once that belief erodes, every outcome feels manufactured. Even clean processes begin to look contaminated. This is the intelligence optics game. No confirmed orders, no visible interventions, just the gravitational pull of institutions that symbolize power without explanation. The result is a narrative battlefield where perception outruns proof and suspicion fills every gap. Stay with this thread, because the next question is not about intelligence at all. It is about what happens when half a nation stops believing that its systems operate in the open. The question detonates the moment it is asked, because it splits the country along instinct rather than evidence. Is this justice finally catching up, or is it power sharpening its tools after a long wait? In America, accountability delayed is either wisdom or malice, depending on which side of the screen you sit on. There is no neutral audience anymore, only interpretations racing ahead of facts. Supporters of the investigation frame it as inevitability. Institutions move slowly. They argue, especially when the subject is explosive. Complex cases require time, document review, witness cooperation, and procedural caution. Rushing would have guaranteed collapse in court. From this view, delay signals seriousness, not strategy. Justice, they say, does not run on cable news deadlines. It runs on evidence thresholds that survive cross-examination, not applause. Critics see something far darker. They point to timing, optics, and political context. Years of silence followed by sudden intensity feels less like diligence and more like calibration. In their telling, justice was not delayed, it was stored, waiting for the right alignment of power. They argue that selective enforcement corrodes legitimacy faster than corruption itself. When law appears to activate only under certain administrations, neutrality becomes a punchline. History feeds both arguments. The Department of Justice has long claimed independence, yet it operates inside a political ecosystem. Attorneys general are appointed, priorities shift, resources follow leadership. This is not conspiracy, it is structure. The system was designed to be insulated, not isolated. That distinction is subtle and often ignored. Insulation reduces pressure, it does not eliminate influence. The phrase weaponized justice thrives because it feels true even when unproven. It captures a fear that law can be aimed like a spotlight, illuminating enemies while leaving allies comfortably in shadow. At the same time, delayed accountability resonates because Americans have watched scandals evaporate without consequence. Both narratives survive because each has historical receipts. The country remembers Watergate and also remembers investigations that led nowhere. Satire emerges naturally. Every press conference becomes a morality play. Every indictment is treated like a championship trophy. Legal language is translated into political memes before the ink dries. Cable panels argue outcomes that courts have not even considered. The justice system becomes content, and content demands drama. Nuance does not trend, outrage does. What makes this moment uniquely dangerous is erosion fatigue. Large portions of the public no longer believe institutions act in good faith, regardless of outcome. A conviction will be called tyranny. An exoneration will be called cover-up. The process itself is now suspect, And that is the real casualty. Law depends on consent as much as authority. When half the country withholds that consent, enforcement becomes performance. The unresolved tension is brutal. If accountability never arrives, impunity wins. If accountability arrives selectively, legitimacy collapses. The system must thread a needle that grows thinner with every headline. This is not just about one investigation. It is about whether Americans still accept that law can exist above politics, even when politics screams otherwise. Stay with this, because the final act is not about guilt or innocence. It is about consequences, not for individuals, but for a system trying to function while being accused of betrayal from every direction at once. If the system cracks, it will not shatter in a single dramatic moment. It will splinter quietly through outcomes that satisfy no one and processes that convince fewer people each time. This endgame is not about a raid, a warrant, or a headline. It is about what happens after the cameras leave, and the country is forced to live with whatever remains standing. Start with the most boring possibility, which is also the most likely. Investigators find procedural violations, sloppy record keeping, unclear chains of custody, maybe nothing that survives criminal court. The legal machine shrugs, recommends reforms, issues reports, and moves on. On paper, the system works. In reality, half the nation declares a cover-up, the other half declares vindication, and trust erodes another layer. Nothing explodes, but something leaks. Confidence drains slowly, invisibly, like air from a tire no one remembers inflating. Now imagine the opposite scenario. Substantive wrongdoing is uncovered. Charges follow, trials crawl forward, appeals stretch into years. The legal victory is precise, technical, and devastatingly unsatisfying. Supporters celebrate justice. Opponents reject legitimacy outright. The verdict does not unify. It detonates. Elections afterward are no longer competitions of ideas, but referendums on belief itself. Every loss is fraud. Every win is theft corrected. Democracy becomes a courtroom drama without an ending. Then there is the most corrosive outcome of all, ambiguity. No definitive conclusions, no clean resolutions, just enough irregularities to fuel suspicion, not enough proof to close the case. This is where systems decay. Uncertainty becomes permanent. Institutions keep functioning, but belief does not return. Voters do not disengage quietly. They radicalize their expectations. They demand perfection from humans and treat imperfection as malice. The stakes extend far beyond one election or one county. Election workers already face threats, resignations, and burnout. Local officials operate under national suspicion. Recruiting competent administrators becomes harder when the job description includes being accused of treason by strangers. With microphones, this is not hypothetical, it is happening. The machinery of democracy depends on ordinary people doing unglamorous work without fearing public destruction. There is also the international cost. America lectures the world about democratic norms while broadcasting its internal distrust in high definition. Adversaries do not need to interfere when citizens do the work themselves. Every unresolved dispute becomes a case study in vulnerability. Credibility abroad is inseparable from confidence at home. The dark humor writes itself. A nation that once feared foreign manipulation now debates whether its own institutions are legitimate. Every election cycle becomes a sequel. Nobody enjoys, but everyone watches. The system does not collapse with tanks in the streets. It collapses when belief becomes optional. The final truth is uncomfortable. Democracy does not require perfection. It requires acceptance of process, even when outcomes sting. If Americans lose the ability to accept lawful conclusions, the system cracks regardless of evidence, not because of fraud alone, and not because of investigations either, but because trust is the only currency that cannot be printed. This story does not end with a verdict. It ends with a choice. Whether a nation can disagree without dismantling the mechanism that lets disagreement exist at all.